if you're having this issue, one thing that I did that helped, so my RPMs were bouncing up and down at 1500 RPMs, almost like the fuel was cutting out. While the car was running and doing the bouncing, I came out here to the engine bay, unplugged the bottom sensor while the car was still running, got back inside. The car would run just fine. Somebody made that recommendation, said it worked for them. So if yours does the same thing, I can almost guarantee you that this procedure would work. So if you have that RPM bouncing at 1500 RPMs, unplug the bottom sensor. The gray one, it only measures wide open and fully closed. So just unplug it, get back inside, see if it still does the RPM bouncing. Mine did not, indicating, at least to me, that this needed to be adjusted and that the car needed to learn where the closed throttle position was. So hopefully that helps. Alright, I'm making this video regarding a 2002 QX4. The process will be slightly different on other years and models, but check your year-specific service manual, but it's pretty similar. So as you saw in that last clip, there was an issue with the RPM bouncing at about 1500 RPMs, almost like it was hitting a rev limiter, but took this thing to a mechanic. He spent 2 days on it, couldn't figure it out. What it is your throttle position sensor. I had put a new one in there, but it didn't solve the issue. The issue is with adjustment. So I'm going to show you how to adjust this. It is in the factory service manual. It seemed to fix it for now, so that's why I'm making this video. Some other people had the same issues, so hopefully this helps. Alright, so you have this upper brown connector, and then you have a brown or a gray connector right below it. The bottom connector is the one you'll pull off in order to do this adjustment procedure. So you'll pull that one off. It's a lot easier if you take off your intake boot, which includes having to take off a couple vacuum lines and a couple other things. It's a lot easier adjustment. So go ahead and do that. Take this off your intake boot. It's pretty simple. You can do it without taking it off. You can adjust it. It will be a little easier if you pull this dipstick out though. So take that pin or that connector off, the gray one, and then also right here at your throttle cable. This is a 02, so it'll look different on some other models. Some of them have this little, I think it's a fuel pressure or something or another. It'll have it right here. The adjustment procedure will be the same, but where you stick your feeler gauges will be a little bit different. So the factory service manual recommends that you use a 0.015 or a 0.0 and a 0.005 feeler gauge for this test to get it dialed in correctly. I ended up not using the 0.005. It was not useful at all and gave me bad readings. On this particular style throttle body, right here, there's a pin that the throttle body will bottom out on. So what you want to do is you're going to put your feeler gauge inside that spot right there. So I'm using the 0.015 for this test, and then once that's in there, I'll show you what I did. I'll take you over to a piece of paper to explain it. So you will need a multimeter for this test. Don't make fun of my little connections, it works. This is what you'll be looking at on the plug. You'll have a top pin and a middle pin on the bottom gray plug. We're not going to be using this bottom pin at all for anything. So what you'll do is you'll loosen the two screws. You'll loosen the top screw right there and the bottom one on the bottom side of the throttle position sensor until they're loose, where you can move the throttle position sensor up and down. So once that's loose and you can make adjustments, that's when you will grab your multimeter, and you want it on continuity mode, and you'll want to test the continuity between this pin and this pin. So with that 0.015 feeler gauge in there, there should not be continuity between these two pins. When you touch it, when you touch these two pins together, if it makes a beeping noise, it shouldn't. At 0.015 of a space, it should not be making continuity. So adjust your throttle position sensor downward, adjust your plugs downward slightly, just a little bit at a time, until you don't get continuity. Make sure as soon as you put your multimeter back on here and it doesn't make continuity, all you do is turn it back up just a hair, measure again. If it makes continuity, make sure you turn it back down to where it breaks continuity, just barely. You want it to just not make contact. Once you reach that point where it doesn't make contact, tighten the screws that hold the throttle position sensor on. Tighten at least one of them down a little bit so it holds it in place and won't move. Alright, once you tighten down those two screws, take out the shim or the feeler gauge. Test continuity with the feeler gauge out. You should hear a beep at this point. It's measuring that the throttle is completely closed. So you want to make sure with the shim out, with your multimeter hooked up to the top two pins on the bottom plug, you want to make sure that with the shim out, or the feeler gauge out, that it will make continuity. It's measuring that the throttle is closed. And then if you put this 0.015 in there, it should lose continuity again. So do that test several times just to make sure that with the throttle closed, it will. With this feeler gauge, it loses continuity. Once you reach that point, that is when it has reached exactly where the adjustment needs to be on that throttle position sensor, and you can tighten your top and your bottom bolts down. I think they're 7mm. And then I'll explain what happens next. After you have everything back on, including the intake boot, map sensor, all that, depending on what all you took off, you will need to start your car, make sure it gets to operating temperature. It helps if you do that before, if you can get it running. But these tick marks right here, what you want to do is, in order to reset your ECU for it to learn the new position of that throttle position sensor, you'll turn it into the on position, not start it, just turn it to the on position for 5 seconds, then turn it to the off position for 10. And you'll repeat that 20 times. So on, then off would be one set, and then to the on position for 5 seconds, and then to the off position for 10 seconds would be another set. Now, it may vary a little bit for year. Just check the factory service manual for your year. After I did this, it ran perfectly fine. Got rid of the RPM bouncing. Hopefully this works for you guys.